Howdy, boys. Coming to you with a fresh banger, hot off the presses, just got done editing it. This one is about faith, and it's going to be about faith in a way that you've probably never heard it before, with some nuance and some details that come from maybe different areas, different faith traditions, different ways of interpreting the scripture. Nothing heretical by any means. I think you'll find that very clear, but maybe something new, kind of a new perspective that you haven't had, integrating with some of the coaching tools that I use for my group, for my one-on-one clients. This is not necessarily something you put on while you're doing laundry or while you're driving. This is more of one that you're going to want to do your own research. You're going to want to follow along and come up with your own conclusions, because there's a lot of implications to some of the principles we cover here that you are not going to want to adapt lightly. If you're somebody who's a subscriber here, you're going to want to be thinking about what all of this means. This topic of faith and how it can be used in your life, not just salvatory faith, but faith that can change your life, change your day to day. There's nuance, and we didn't cover all of that here. There's some things that I didn't talk about with, also mentioned in James, about how, hey, you ask and you do not receive because you ask amiss, that you may spend it on your pleasures, right? This idea of the reason you're not getting what you're having faith for is because you're asking selfishly. It's all about you. So I'm not here in this video to try to sound like a name it and claim it type of nonsense, right? But what I am doing is refusing to water down the potency of what faith is according to Scripture. And I want to give you guys a practical look that you can use to make mountains move through trusting the Lord in your own life. I believe the Bible has that for us. So, like I said, not everything is covered here in all the nuance possible, with every, exception and nook and cranny covered. I just want to say I know that. But I also want to say, hey, now that you know that I know that, watch the video. Take value from it, take notes on it, and in the comments, share your thoughts. Share your questions. Share how you heard something new. Share how it's different than how you've thought about faith. Share how you want me to speak more on certain things that I didn't cover, because there's a lot. Watch it with intention. Let's have a conversation in the comments, and I know you guys will enjoy. Thanks for watching.
Gentlemen, welcome to A Mountain Moving Faith. I want to show you from a biblical perspective, what is faith? How does it work? And how can we access and know that we have the type of faith that it takes to move mountains, whether that be figuratively for a big challenge in your life, or literally, because I believe that every word that Jesus said is true. Not just was true, it is true. And that we have access to a very powerful faith. Elijah was a man with a nature just like ours, and he prayed. And as you guys know, some crazy things happened when he prayed. We're going to look at some of those things today. We're going to look at some other examples today of what faith looks like. And I'm not just talking about faith for salvation. I'm talking about faith for mountains to move in your life. So to start, guys, I want to look at probably my favorite verse this year that I've been chewing on a lot this year. Hebrews 11:1. In this verse, we're going to talk about what faith is, okay? This verse tells us quite plainly, and I want to break this down. What is faith? It is the substance of things hoped for, right? It is the evidence of things not seen. So we have two elements here. One element is substance and the other is evidence. We're using words that are kind of meaning the same thing here for the sake of emphasis, because guess what you don't see? Hope, right? Things not seen, things hoped for, it's the same things. If we don't see something, then the only way that we can imagine it being in our existence is through hope, right? Assuming it's a favorable thing. Things hoped for by default, by definition, something that we hope for is something that we don't currently see. I have right here with me a cup of coffee. I don't hope for this. Why? I have it. It is in my physical reality right now. So I have substance for this. I have evidence for this cup of coffee, right? If I did not have this cup of coffee in front of me, then I would not have substance, right? Because it wouldn't be there. There would be no substantive cup of coffee. I would also not have evidence that this cup of coffee exists if it wasn't seen, if I didn't have it in front of me, right? So if I don't have it with me physically on this physical plane of existence, but I hope for it, or maybe I believe in it, even though I don't yet see it, that's where faith comes in. Faith is the substance of what I'm hoping for and the evidence of what I don't see. Faith is only necessary when there's no substance, when there's no evidence, right? I don't need faith in gravity, because I have substance to prove that. I have evidence to prove that. Some would argue you don't even need faith to believe there's a God. You need a little bit, but there's also evidence and substance, right? Maybe just not enough to unequivocally prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that God exists, right? Maybe there's a little bit of a gap there that you need faith for. So that's faith, guys, substance and evidence. So let's visualize this a little bit. And with a very rudimentary drawing, you guys know I'm not the best artist. Let's say this is you, okay? Not very flattering, I apologize. This is you, and you're on this ledge, you're on this edge of a cliff, and the place you want to get to, the reality you want to experience, the thing that you want to have, whatever it is, a state of being, a person in your life, a possession, something changed, a healing, it's over here, right? Your hope is over here, and your current reality is over here. In between your current reality and your hope, you have a chasm, and you have no evidence, no substance, no proof that you can get from here to here. There's no substance, evidence, or proof for that. It's just you chilling on the cliff. And as a matter of fact, the only substance and evidence that you know of is that you have been stuck in your current state for however many months, years, or decades. And you also know that if you try to go for hope, well, the evidence suggests that you're going to crash and burn. That's why a lot of us don't hold on to hope, is because we don't have faith that we can get there. We see the evidence and substance of our past and of our present situation, and we think if I try to go for hope, I'm going to fall into this chasm, into a pit of death and or despair. This is where faith comes in, right? So faith is the bridge between the current reality and the reality you hope for. Faith provides the substance and the evidence that you can one day attain your hope. That's what faith is, guys. Faith is the bridge from where you are to where you want to be when you have a lack of substance or evidence needed to fully get there. So that's what faith is. Let's talk about what powerful faith actually looks like, because there's a lot of fanaticism, there's a lot of showboating, a lot of pomp and circumstance around faith and powerful faith. And that's in religious circles in Christianity, and that's in the circles of the woo-woo, of the spiritual, of the occult, of all religion. There's often tons of ritual and tons of, hullabaloo about the whole thing. And I want to show you guys some examples of that. So we're going to go to one of my favorite passages in scripture. And guys, I have it all here for you. You obviously can look it up yourself. You obviously can slow it down and pause and reread. Always do your own research, guys, but I'm going to blow through this pretty quickly and do some summarizing. All right. So make sure you do your own homework, but I'm going to try to give you guys the gist of it real quick. All right. So Elijah, prophet Elijah, him and Ahab are not on the best of terms. Those are kind of the two main characters here. Elijah comes to the people of Israel and says, hey, you guys need to pick somebody. How long will you falter between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, follow him, right? Pick somebody. And then the people didn't say anything back to him. So Elijah says, all right, here's the situation. I'm the only one on God's side. Baal has 450 dudes. We're going to have a little competition. Y'all bring us 2 bulls. We're going to have one apiece. You guys can pick one. I'll have the other one. We're going to chop it up, put it on the altar, but we're not going to light a fire, okay? I'm going to do the same thing for my bull. Then we're going to have a little God competition, a little God face down, little showdown. You're going to call on Baal, and I'm going to call on the name of the Lord. And the God who answers by fire, we're going to say that's God. And everybody says, fair enough. Sounds good to me. So kind of a ballsy challenge by Elijah right out of the gate. He's like, I'm sick of this. Y'all need to pick somebody. Y'all got 450, I got me. But that's not what it's about. It's about who's the real God, and we're about to find out who it is. So he sets up this competition, and it's kind of a thing that you can't refuse. The terms are very fair, right? He said, we're going to do the exact same thing, and we're going to pray, and whoever's God acts is the real God. So the prophets of Baal set everything up. They chop up their bull, they put it on the wood, and then they start calling on Baal from morning even until noon. So, 2, 3, 4 hours at least of just crying out to this false god. But of course, there's no voice, no one answered. And then they leaped about the altar. So now the theatrics start. They're jumping, they're dancing around, shouting. It's high noon, and Elijah starts poking fun. He says, yell louder. Maybe he's meditating, or he's busy, or he's on a journey, or maybe he's taking a nap, right? And so looks like they take his advice. They keep crying, and then they start cutting themselves, which apparently was their custom. And they're using knives and they're using lances until the blood gushes out. Wow, like quite the display here. Let's pause and just take note. In motivational movies, sports films, Rocky, war movies, in anime, these moving drama stories, in a lot of religious circles, I'm not going to name names, I'm just going to say religious circles, Christian and otherwise. This is a lot of times people are not actually cutting themselves, but there's a lot of theatrics, right? There's rituals. There's sacrifices, there's crystals, and there's humming, and there's these special things, and there's these symbols, right? Symbology of faith and of belief. And it usually has a certain exaggerated look to it, doesn't it? So when midday was past, they prophesied until the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, But there was no voice, no one answered, no one paid attention. Crickets from heaven. Then it's Elijah's turn, right? This is evening. He's given the prophets of Baal all day. They've cried aloud. They've danced around. They've jumped up and down. They've cut themselves. Nothing. All 450 of them, apparently. Elijah says to the people, come over here. So everybody comes over. Then he fixes up the altar that had been broken, 12 stones, symbolizing 12 tribes of Jacob, right? Then he builds the altar. He digs a trench around the altar that's large enough to hold that many units of seed. I'm not sure how much that is, but it's a trench, right? He digs around the altar. Then he prepares his bowl, the same as the prophets of Baal prepared theirs. And then he said, we're going to drench this thing with water. So he drenches it with water 3 times, such that not only is the offering soaked, but the entire trench that he dug around the altar is filled with water. So after everything's soaked, at the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, Elijah says a very genuine, non-theatrical prayer. Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and I'm your servant, that I have done all these things at your word. Hear me, O Lord, hear me, that this people may know that you are the Lord God, and that you have turned their hearts back to you again. He prayed one time. This is what he said. And then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt sacrifice and the wood and the stones and the dust. It eats everything. And it licked up the water that was in the trench. And then pretty brutal ending for the prophets of Baal. So do not let one of them escape. All 450 were seized and Elijah executed them all. Done. Powerful story, powerful W for the forces of God. The contrast I want you to see here is which faith was more powerful. Obviously, prophets of Baal, their faith was never going to be powerful whether they prayed quietly or loudly. But I want you to notice there's a confidence. There's a quiet confidence. For those of you who've done one-on-one or do my Ultimate Confidence course, confidence is faith in a sense. There's this quiet confidence Elijah has. He's patient, right? He lets them do their thing. He's not in a rush. He waits until they've spent themselves, they've bled out. Then he makes the stakes even higher by soaking everything in water. And he prays one time, calmly, succinctly, done. And then fire falls, right? Why is it, hang with me, why is it that you think that it's so cool in like the Bond movies, James Bond, or superhero movies, right? Or, Mission Impossible, that kind of stuff. When the main character is walking away from the explosion or the pandemonium that's taking place, and what does their face look like? Calm, cool, and collected. Why is that so powerful to us? Why do we think that that's so amazing? Because we know that that represents true confidence. We know intuitively that true confidence, true faith is not theatrical. It's not flailing around. The cool guy, the nonchalant guy, he's the one who gets the girl, not the tryhard. Why? Because the tryhard indicates, I'm trying to compensate for my lack of belief. You catch this? When you're trying hard, you're trying to compensate for your lack of confidence, for your lack of faith. The reason why the prophets of Baal are cutting themselves and bleeding out and crying and dancing around is not because they believe that Baal is going to just answer them like Elijah believed his God was going to answer him. No. They're trying to compensate because they're like, we got to go huge here for this to work. It's compensation. A lot of faith nowadays, again, I'm not going to name names, but it can be very theatrical. We're going to have a whole system. We're going to have music. We're going to have ritual. We're going to have certain props that you have to have. We've made it into this horse and pony show, but the powerful faith is not like that. I want to give you guys another example. This one is closer to home and it's closer to modernity as well. New covenant faith. So here we have a centurion. Now the centurion is well loved by the people. Why? Well, apparently he loves the Jews and built a synagogue for them. So he's in with the Jewish leaders. He's like a good Roman centurion, apparently, right? Even though Rome was the oppressor, the centurion, who is a commander in Rome, he's held in high esteem by the Jews. Now, he has a servant who was dear to him, who is sick and ready to die. So this well-loved centurion has a servant that's on death's door. When he heard about Jesus, the centurion, he talks to his Jewish buddies, the elders, and he sends the Jews to Jesus. Now, think about the kind of subtle flex that's happening here. You're the Roman centurion in the nation that's oppressing the Jews, but you have finessed your position in the Roman occupation such that the people that you are ruling love you because you have, from your abundance, given them what they want, protected what's important to them. Very cool. And when their Messiah is up and coming, this people that you're kind of oppressing, you're in good so much with their elders that you don't even need to go talk. Like, think about this. This is a true CEO boss move, right? He says, you know what? I'm not even worthy for you to come over and enter my roof, but I've got my Jewish elder buddies. They're going to come talk to you, right? So he sends his elder buddies to Jesus. Centurion doesn't even talk to Jesus. And he sends them with this message. He says, Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof. And I didn't even think myself worthy to come to you. That's different than a normal CEO. Normal CEO is like, I'm too busy for you. This guy says, Jesus, you're too much for me. I'm not even worthy to come talk to you. You don't have to come over. We don't have to talk. You just say the word. Just say the word. He's delegating this whole thing. So just say the word and my servant will be healed. Why? Because I understand how faith works by the fact that I have authority. I have soldiers under me. If I tell one of my soldiers to go, he goes, done. If I tell another soldier to come, he comes, done. If I tell my servant, do this, he does it, done. Just say the word, Jesus, because I have faith that you have authority, not just over your disciples, but over everything. I believe that you have authority over the illness in my servant who is not even within your range of vision right now. I'm not even talking to you directly. I'm delegating this whole thing. Like, you don't see me, you don't see my servant, and none of it matters because I believe that you have authority over it all. Right? So Jesus, walking on his merry way, hears the message from the Jewish elders and marveled and turns around and says to the crowd that's kind of following him as he goes, he turns around and he says, guys, I have not found such great faith, not even in Israel. And of course, when the Jewish elders go back to the house, the servant was all better. But catch this. Jesus hears the delegation. He doesn't even say anything. He just turns around to the crowd and says, guys, Israel is supposed to be God's chosen people. It's supposed to be like where the most faith would be, right? The Israelites, out of anybody, should have had the most faith in God. But he said, you know what? I haven't found faith as great as this pagan Roman centurion's faith. I haven't found faith this good anywhere among God's chosen people. And look at the type of faith it was. It was the type of faith that said, you know what? I don't need to be there. We don't need to set up some sort of a holy circle and dance. We don't have to have a ritual. I'm just going to have my friends come talk to you and ask for you to just say the word. That's all I'm asking. Because I know that if you do that, it's done. Just like if I tell one of my soldiers to do something, it's done. That is the great faith. It's that calm, walk away from the explosion, cool and collected confidence that says, it's done. That's the type of faith that you want. Notice how it's not emotionally charged. There's some humility, there's a genuineness to it, but it's not flailing around. It's grounded. It is humble and it is reverent, but it is not dancing. It is not dramatic. Notice that. There's no need for that. If you're doing that, again, that's a compensation for your lack of faith. It's not evidence of your faith. It's compensation for a lack of faith. So check this out. How do we know that faith is real? Well, as we've already discussed, it's not because of how it looks. It's not because of the theatrics or lack thereof. Now, I'm not saying that there can't be theatrics. We see in Scripture many cases of lepers that want to be healed, that literally are like running and very excited. We see blind men shouting, we see definitely some theatrical things, demon possessions and seizures and all these kinds of things. I'm not saying that that stuff is sinful, but what I am saying is it's certainly not necessary. Certainly not necessary for the highest form of faith that Jesus saw, right? So how do we know that the faith is real? This is a tricky passage, and it took me a while to really grasp what it means, but I think I'm close enough to share with you guys on this. Let's dig in. What does it profit if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can faith save him? Okay, so what James is asking here is, if you say you believe in something, but you don't have actions to back it up, do you really believe it? That's the question, right? And here's how we know that that's the question, because he gives examples. If a brother or sister is naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you says to them, depart in peace, be warmed and filled, which is a belief statement, like a declaration. Depart in peace, be warmed and filled, right? Like, be clothed and be fed, right? But you do not give them the things which are needed for the body. What does it profit? He's saying if you say something, but your actions are not in alignment with your words, then your words are meaningless, right? If I say to you, hey, be rich, be warm, have some food, but I don't give you any food, I don't give you any money, then my words are meaningless, right? It's pretty simple, right? So he's saying faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. He's not saying you need to go out and do works to prove your faith. He's saying that if you do have faith, you will be doing works. The faith that doesn't have works to back it up is a dead faith. Fair enough? Just like if I said, hey, have some food, and I didn't give you any food, it would be a worthless, dead statement, right? And now James is anticipating an argument. You have faith, and I have works. Show me your faith without your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. You believe there is one God. You do well to do that. Even the demons believe there is one God, and they tremble. Faith without works is dead. Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered Isaac his son on the altar? Now, some people are going to get tripped up there. When you read that word justified, I don't want you to think saved. This is because there's another word for that, saved, right? Think about justified as whenever I was in the corporate world working for the Walmart World Headquarters, there was an audit. There was a third-party audit on our department. And what we had to do is take record and keep record of everything we were doing with our time. And then that record would be sent to the auditors to justify our existence as a department. So let's break that down. My report justified my existence, but my report was not the thing that mattered. It simply justified the thing that mattered, right? I was already doing the work before I made the report, but the report is what justified me. My work is what made me valuable. My work is what got me paid. My work is what saved me in that environment, but my report is what justified me. Does that make sense? So in this case, Abraham had faith, but his faith was justified when he offered his son Isaac on the altar. His faith was proven to be real when his works backed it up. Does that make sense? It's not that his works saved him, but his works did justify his faith. By works, his faith was made perfect, right? Because an imperfect faith, a dead faith, an incomplete faith would be a faith that doesn't have any works to back it up. If I say, again, here, have some food, then my statement is made perfect when I give you the food, right? That's what that means. And then we give some other examples here too. Rahab the harlot, justified by works. And then he says, as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead also. Side note, you're going to read some other passages about how the works of the law justify no one. And then you're going to read this talking about how works do justify you. Little caveat there, the works of the law is talking about the law, like the old ritualistic circumcision, that kind of thing. Two different types of works. These types of works are about backing up what you say with doing, right? Clearly that's the example here. And here is how we can see that in these two stories that we went over. So in Elijah's story, Elijah clearly has faith that his God is the real God. And he makes that perfect. He makes that faith perfect through works. The works that he did is literally setting up a challenge to where his whole life is on the line. Ahab already hates him. Jezebel hates him. The people are upset. There's 450 Baal prophets to his one. He's in a pickle, and he raises the stakes by setting up a competition to where God has to come through. That's works. And it's not works that he did to prove his faith. It's works that came from his faith. The works that he did were evidence that his faith was real. And then, to make matters even higher stakes, he pours all the water, right? He's dumping water on the offering 3 times, such that it not only drenches the whole altar, the wood, and the bowl, but it fills the trench around the altar itself. So his works are definitely in alignment with his faith, proving it, making it perfect. With the case of the centurion, notice how there's zero skepticism. The centurion's works in this case were simply sending his friends, the Jewish elders, to Jesus and saying, hey, this doesn't have to be a deal. Just say something. Just say the word. And because you have authority, it'll be done. Think about how crazy that is. Like, word is going to get around, right? Everybody's favorite centurion, Robert, he sends the Jewish elders to Jesus, who has this entourage of people behind him. The elders relay the message to Jesus. Jesus turns around and talks to the whole crowd and says how crazy it is. And everybody finds out within minutes the guy got healed. This is a headliner, right? That centurion is putting his reputation on the line by doing all that with the Romans. They're going to say, dude, what are you doing interfacing with Jesus? Did your servant actually get healed? Like, do you believe in this guy? Like, they're thinking he might be sort of this insurrectionist. Like, do you align with him? There's so much at play here. And the centurion casually just does it, right? That's the demonstration of his faith. That's not what saves him, but it is justification that his faith has works and it's not dead. Now, the reason I'm locking in on the works piece of the faith is I want to come back to the faith bridge. When I drew the faith bridge initially, it looks kind of like the worst rainbow you've ever seen. I understand that, but it was a whole bridge. In theory, with this bridge looking like this, you could just kind of walk across it and get to the other side. But practically, that's not how it works. Let me show you how it works practically. Practically, there's never a bridge in front of you at any time. All that you have is evidence of the past and evidence of what you think the future will look like, which is, if I step into this hope, I'm going to fall into the pit of death and or despair, right? The faith bridge is built one step at a time. Catch that? The faith bridge is built one step at a time. So when you initially take that first step of faith, it's going to be right here. That's your first step. And as you lean into it, as you put your weight on that front foot, you're trusting, you're having faith that the bridge will form under you. And then when it does, you then must take the next step of faith. And that'll be right here. And then when that step forms under you, you'll have to take another step, and then another, and then another. And thus the bridge is slowly formed underneath you as you take those steps. And as you take the steps across the bridge, you will start to notice that the footing underneath you is solid. And then from your place midway through the bridge, you will be able to look back and you will be able to notice, oh, I've actually come a long way. Oh, I have new evidence now, right? It doesn't take me as much faith anymore to traverse this part of the bridge because I already know that it exists through substance, through evidence. Remember, faith is the substance of what we hope for, of what we don't see. If I've been supported thus far by the bridge, then I don't need faith for where I've already come from anymore. Now I can encourage others that are there. Now I can revisit those areas with even more certainty and confidence. But as I continue on this journey, that's where I'm going to continue to need faith. And as I traverse the rest of this journey, my faith will be grown and strengthened until eventually I do make it over here to my area of hope, until the Lord calls me to yet a deeper level of faith. So there's a lot of lessons within this, but one I want you to think about right now is you have this area of hope over here that you want to get to. And currently you're sitting at your current state. What is the step that it would take to move you into a space where you don't have evidence or substance to think that it would work, to think that it would work out? What is the next step that you can take, either literally or metaphorically, figuratively, that would move you in the direction of your hope? What is that step? If you truly believed with the calm confidence that the centurion had, that Elijah had, that the Lord would come through for you, if you truly believed that, what would be the step you would take? It doesn't have to be a big step. It can be a small step. What is the smallest next step that you would take if you believed with that calm, quiet confidence that the Lord would come through for you? Take a second. Write that down. Figure out what that would be. And I want to close with one more passage talking about the importance of faith. So check this out. This is James 1, 5 through 8. So we're going back to James. We just came out of James chapter 2, where he's talking about the type of faith that saves you, the faith that has works to justify it. He's talking about faith again here, earlier actually, in chapter 1. He says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. Let's just sit there for a second. He's literally saying, if you lack wisdom, ask God. He gives it freely to everybody. He ain't stingy. He's liberal. He's not budgeting it all and holding it back. He's going to give it to you freely and without reproach. And if you ask, it will be given to you. Do you believe that? Do you believe it's that simple? Because here's the thing. James follows up that promise in verse 5 with the condition in verse 6. He says, let him ask in faith, right? What have we determined faith is? Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And we've determined that the highest form of faith is not the theatrical compensatory faith. It's the type of faith that's calm, cool, and collected, the walking away from the explosion, that it will be done. As simple as delegation, simple as saying, go here, do this. Very confident, very calm faith. James says, let him ask in faith with no doubting. Zero. None. Not a shred of doubt. For he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. Very symbolic, right? Because when Peter was walking on the water, when did he start sinking? Well, it was when he started looking at the wind and the waves. He became driven and tossed by the wind. And James says, moreover, if you do decide to ask with doubt, don't think for a minute, let not that man suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. You're not going to get jack. You're not going to get anything from the Lord. Why? Because you're a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. I feel like we don't get this in Christian circles. We're like, oh, are you doubting? Yeah, that happens. And it does. I don't want to have judgment for people who doubt, but I just want to be clear. If you're doubting what you're praying for, don't suppose that you will receive anything from the Lord. I'm not making this up. It's right here, right? Do you think Elijah was doubting? No. I mean, Elijah had some doubting moments for sure, but not when he did the altar thing, you feel me? Like, he was full of faith. The centurion, I'm sure he's doubted things before, but not when he sent the whole elder delegation to go talk to Jesus and said, say the word, right? But if you want the type of faith that can move mountains, it has to be with no doubting. When you look at this word doubting in the Greek, what you find is not so much a conceptual skepticism, right? A lot of times in modernity, when we think about doubting, we think about like atheists or these millennial hippie-looking people that are deconstructing their faith. That's what we think about when we think of doubting. And that's not illegitimate, but the doubting we're talking about here is more of an internal dissonance, In my terms, it would be a misalignment. There's this internal dissonance. I don't know if I really am this way or that way. He's saying you can't come to the Lord asking for something in that state and think that you're going to get something because you're double-minded. There's two sides of you that are at war. That's what it means to doubt, is this internal dissonance with what you really think. It's not a conceptual skepticism. It's an internal conflict and a war that makes you unstable, that makes you driven and tossed by the wind. And so that's why, guys, it's super important when we talk about this faith bridge. I don't want you thinking about what's over here. Because the truth is you may not have an internal congruence and alignment enough to come to the Lord with a type of faith to put your foot on this particular step of the bridge. You might be here. That might be your first step, right? It's definitely not over here. You need to find out, what is the smallest step forward I can take with full confidence, right? I know we're talking about bridges and crossing things and whatnot, but I want to tweak it just a little bit. Think about cliff jumping, right? We've all seen our share of fail videos, I'm sure, where someone's about to jump off the diving board or jump off a cliff, and then there's a hesitation, right? It can be disastrous. Broken bones, concussion, death. There can be all kinds of things that go wrong when hesitation. There's slipping, or there's tripping, or the jump is incomplete, the flip doesn't go all the way around, and catastrophe ensues. Why? Because there was doubting. There wasn't doubting about how tall the jump was. There wasn't doubting about how the water would feel. There wasn't doubting about the cliff. There was doubting within the person. Doubting of, what am I going to do? How am I going to act? There's an internal dissonance taking place, and catastrophe ensues. And it's the same with faith with God, right? You don't want to take that step with anything less than full confidence. And it's not the hype up, okay, count to 3, and then we're going to take this huge step of faith. 1, 2. That's just not what we're seeing biblically, right? The greatest possible faith is simply this James Bond, calm, cool, collected. Say the word, Lord, and it will be done. Easy, simple. What is that small step that you can take with full confidence?